Hello there, and a very warm welcome to the first ever episode of The Hub. I'm Wang Guan in Beijing. It's all about perspectives. We've heard it all the time, but what does it really mean? Take the perception of China, for example. What kind of country is it? Global public opinion is split. One narrative is that China is a peaceful and progressive country run by a highly efficient and meritocratic government that aspires to turn the world into what Beijing calls a community of shared destiny. The other narrative, however, says it is an authoritarian and revisionist power that seeks to challenge the West in human rights, technology, political systems, and undermine the so-called rules-based international order.
China is the only country with the economic, diplomatic, military, and technological power to seriously challenge the stable and open international system.
That Beijing continues to coerce, to intimidate, and to make claims.
This pandemic came out of China, and it came out of China for a reason. That's a country with poor health practices. It's a country where government officials deliberately covered up the early stages of the virus when it could have been stopped.
Yeah. In America and much of the Western world, people tend to think the latter. A recent poll from the Pew Research showed that 73% of all Americans have unfavorable views of China. And that sentiment is shared through much of Western Europe. Now, many factors contributed to this trend, and to be fair, Western news media coverage of China played a big part. In my new book, Manufacturing the China Narrative, I studied 400 top-ranked Western news articles published over the past decade on China. They covered key geopolitical and economic events, from the South China Sea to Taiwan, from the Belt and Road Initiative to Xinjiang. A few findings are pretty remarkable. First, it's interesting to see how U.S. mainstream media told the official line in their coverage of China. For example, a study of 30 most cited U.S. media reports on the 2016 South China Sea arbitration showed they included 90% of the talking points of the White House and the Pentagon. And it is a similar story in their coverage of Taiwan, Hong Kong, Xinjiang, and the Belt and Road Initiative. The trick of agenda setting lies in the choice of experts. In the South China Sea coverage, for each Chinese expert quoted, there were 5 times as many Western experts cited, and a third of these Western experts came from CSIS, a conservative think tank whose largest funders include Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and General Dynamics. That's America's largest weapons manufacturers, who arguably benefit from a confrontational relationship with Beijing. In addition, double standards can be found often, not least on the issue of terrorism. We compared the most read 30 Western news reports on the 2014 attack in southern China versus the top 30 news report on the Charlie Hebdo attack in Paris. Virtually all reports called the Paris attack terror attack and blamed the attackers, whereas only 2 sources described the Chinese attack as terror attack, in quotation marks, with ethnic repression being the underlying theme. So our question today, why is the perception of China becoming increasingly negative in the Western world? Did the West get China wrong? What can China do to better explain itself? And at this hour, we're joined by Carl Zha in Bali, Indonesia. He's the host of Silk and Steel.
And it's something that's very graphic, being posted by not a nobody in China, but someone who represents the Chinese government.
In October 2020, Carl Zha was questioned by Sky News Australia regarding a political cartoon depicting Australian soldiers' killing of Afghan children.
Scott Morris criticizes China all the time. I mean, so does Australian media. I mean, that's why is it suddenly unacceptable for China to criticize Australia? I think it's kind of hypocritical for Australia to say that we can criticize you, on human rights ground, but you cannot criticize us. I mean, it's a two-way street.
Most people who have watched your debate on Australian television think you killed it. How did you pull that off?
Actually, I was approached by a friend, said that the Sky News Australia is looking for somebody with a Chinese perspective to comment on the recent diplomatic role between Australia and China over the Chinese artist Wu Heqimin's cartoon of Australian atrocities in Afghanistan. So I thought, why not? And I was prepared to be more conciliatory beforehand. I was trying to stress the importance of
But you're certainly
China.
provoked.
Yes, I was. Yes, for sure. I wasn't prepared for when the host began a series of very aggressive line of leading questions. And I definitely felt very provoked. And I think I came out more aggressive than I originally planned. But I think I voiced what many Chinese people already voiced online regarding this whole ridiculous fair.
Let me shift gears a little bit and talk about the perception of China in Western societies. According to multiple polls, be it Gallup or Pew Research, the perception of China is turning increasingly negative in the US and across much of Western Europe. Why do you think that is the case?
I think, again, there's many reasons. One, China is getting stronger. I remember in 1990s, the overwhelming, the whole narrative in U.S. was that we don't like the Chinese government, but we like the Chinese people. But they look upon Chinese people as some kind of passive victims, voiceless victims waiting to be saved by the West. And it's increasingly harder to spin that narrative nowadays, when people can see that China is growing much more prosperous, much more stronger. The people in China are living a richer and better lives than they were before. So it's harder to spin that way. At the same time, the West is having its own issues. Ever since the great financial crisis in 2008, the West has struggled. I mean, I think it's even to this day, and with all the economic problems in the West, there's a lot of anxiety about the future, and the politicians in the West capitalize on that, and oftentimes use China as a scapegoat. Even though much of the U.S. public don't have much understanding of China, they fear China because their media tells them so. The media, the politicians capitalize on their ignorance and use China as a scapegoat for all the problem that's occurring to the United States, whether it's loss of jobs or or more recently the COVID pandemic. Under Trump administration, especially when Trump had failed to contain COVID in U.S., the Trump officials, particularly his Deputy National Security Advisor, Matt Pottinger, who was in charge of containing COVID, when he failed, he actively pushed to shift the blame to China. And that's when you are seeing all these so-called lab leak theories coming out of the mainstream media. The spike that you see in the anti-China sentiment in the last few years is really tied to these factors.
Yeah, but do you feel that telling the Western audience what China is truly like, at least according to your understanding, is a tough sell versus the China that's been portrayed by the mainstream narratives?
Oh, sure. Because U.S. is one of the most propagandized country in the world. In United States, we have been conditioned through a very early age, through indoctrination of anti-communism and support for U.S. empire. For example, when I first came to U.S. at age 13, my 8th grade classroom, this was during the time of first Gulf War, my 8th grade classroom were decorated with pictures of U.S. tanks and military hardware and all the support our troops stickers and flags, and I was really confused. It's like, Iraq is not invading United States, and why is it patriotic to support sending troops halfway across the world to Middle East to fight Saddam? I didn't get that. But when you're growing up in that kind of environment, you get all these indoctrination propaganda through osmosis, and this is kind of the level of information people are receiving about China as well. So yes, there's a lot of resistance.
Carl Zha, fascinating discussions. Thank you so much. I learned a lot.